Alright, guys, so literally just finished watching Eternals, which is the next film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I know this is technically a day late. My Shang-Chi review went up a day late. Sorry, fell behind, but we're back on track. Back on track. So Eternals. This movie was also released in 2021. And this movie was also supposed to come out in 2020. This was, 2020 we were supposed to get two MCU movies. We were supposed to get Black Widow and Eternals. Those were supposed to be the first two films of Phase 4. Then, of course, like I said in my Black Widow review, this little thing called the pandemic happened that kind of delayed everything, and then Eternals just happened to come out after Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. And at this point in time, I was on such a Marvel high, like an MCU high, that I loved Black Widow at the time. I loved Shang-Chi at the time. So it was almost destined that I was going to love Eternals. And I walked out loving Eternals. I saw them multiple times in the theater. I loved this movie. I hadn't watched it since I bought the movie on digital. I don't own the physical media for Eternals. I know, shocker. I don't own the Eternals on physical media, but I do own it on digital. But I haven't watched the movie since. Now, it's not because I fell out of loving the movie. It's just that I never really had the time to watch it. So today was the first time I rewatched it in a really long time. And I'm going to say this. I still don't understand the hate this movie gets. I love this movie. I love this movie. This is for me the most different, the most unique of all the MCU movies. Because number one, it completely stands on its own. You do not have to have seen any of the previous MCU movies to enjoy this movie. This movie completely stands on its own, with the exception of a couple references to the Avengers. There's a scene at a dinner table where Sprite mentions Captain Rogers and Iron Man. Kingo at one point talks about how, Thor used to follow him around when Thor was a kid. There are definitely references to the larger MCU, but for the most part, this movie stands so far on its own that if, let's say, if I were to show this to somebody who had never seen a single Marvel movie, I think they would watch this and I think they would actually enjoy. I think they could watch this and easily follow it, and they wouldn't be lost at all. I think this movie visually looks incredible. Everything from the cinematography, the visual effects, everything from a visual standpoint, it looks incredible. But the one thing I love most about this movie is the fact that this movie it almost feels like what would happen if you got Stanley Kubrick to make a movie for the MCU. It's very high concept level sci-fi. It's very out there. It's a very character driven movie. It's not a very, yes, there's a lot of action in it, but it's not a very action heavy movie. It is a much more character-driven story, and I don't know if maybe that's what a lot of people missed the points of what this movie was trying to do. It was trying to look at the entire history of the MCU from a different perspective, from the perspective of these characters who have been around essentially since the beginning of the MCU, since the very, very beginning of the MCU. Since its literal universal creation in this universe, you know, because we've seen it from the perspective of the high school kid. We've seen it from the perspective of the Asgardians. We've seen it from the perspective of the soldier. We've seen it from the perspective of the billionaire and all these other characters. But we've never seen it from the perspective of characters like the Eternals, who have been around since essentially the dawn of existence. Or at least existence for that universe. Now, that's not to say this movie's perfect. This movie has some issues. Number one, I think the main deviant, who's played by Bill Skarsgård, I think he's a very weak villain. I'm sorry, I just don't buy the fact that, you know, he's like I get it if he were to suck the power from the Eternals and like gain their abilities. I would get that. But to all of a sudden just suck the power from the Eternals, and then he just starts like growing a intelligence, and he becomes just sentient and starts speaking perfect English, and just, you know, I'm just like, that's really like, I never bought into, I still don't buy into that. I still feel like that's a weak element of the story. Also, the other problem I have with this movie is there are some things that are introduced in this movie that are so cataclysmic and so vitally important to the MCU. Like a giant celestial popping out of the ocean, a giant celestial showing up out of nowhere into the sky, and then you have Star Fox and Pip showing up at the post-credit scene, and then you have Blade showing up to talk to Black Knight. It's like you have all these things that are happening, and there's been no payoff for any of it. This movie, I feel like, introduced way too many big ideas for the MCU to not follow through with those big ideas so far. Now, yes, we've seen Tiamat. We've seen the giant celestial coming out of the ocean in Captain America Brave New World. We've seen the repercussions of that, obviously, with the creation of adamantium. We've seen the, spoiler alert, for those of you who haven't seen Captain America Brave New World, it's been out for a month now, so spoiler alert. So obviously we've seen the repercussions of that, but everything else, you know, like Arsham at the end of the movie, Arsham brings the Eternals and he says, "I will return for judgment." When? Okay, when? You know? And then there's this big title card that comes out at the end of the movie. Eternals will return. Okay, when? You know? Then you have Blade coming out at the end. Granted, he's off screen, but you know it's him. You know, "You sure you're ready for that, Mr. Whitman?" And yet, we still don't have a Blade movie. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Eternals, guys. I love the movie. Yes, does it have its issues? Yes. But overall, this movie, I think, is fantastic. I still think it's a top 10 MCU movie. I really do. I still think it's a top 10 MCU movie for me. That will do it for this review, guys. Join me tomorrow. Now, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to make a radical shift away from the MCU, and we're going to hop into a different universe, and we're going to start talking about the Spider-Man films. We're going to talk about specifically the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies. I'm not going to do the animated Spider-Man movies, but I'm specifically going to talk about the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies, just because those tie into the next MCU film that comes after Eternals. So yeah, I'm going to make a shift, and I'm going to talk about the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies. Yeah, so tomorrow you will get a review and reaction to Spider-Man. So Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. So that will do it for this review, guys. Thank you so much for watching. And I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.